go. Nope. It's just finished. And here we are. Turn your microphone on.
Are we live?
We're live.
Excellent. How you doing, David?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm okay. For those of you who are tuning in, this is David Mash. He's a very special guest. He is a futurist. He is a composer, a synthesist, a guitarist, an author. He is also serves on the boards of both the Alan R. Perlman Foundation and the Moog Foundation. So it's a real honor to have him here. We're doing things a little different today. So if there seems to be a little interesting tech glitch, just bear with us. But so far, so good, I hope. All right. Are we seeing things? I'm just checking right now.
I see people saying hello to me.
Excellent. That's a great sign.
Hello, all Harry. Right. Hello, Megan.
We're doing things a little different. All right. All right. I think we got it down. All right. So I just want to say a couple of words of how I met David. One of the things I've said many times to people who are in the synthesizer world is that there were a lot of names that went across the dinner table. We had a dinner table was always a big exchange with me, my mom, and my dad, and David Mash was one of those names. It wasn't until 2015, which was the Everything ARP Symposium at Berkeley College of Music, that I actually got to meet him in person. And it was a fantastic event. I'm actually going to be posting some clips from it later, not later today, but later on in the month. But I was really moved by David's story. He told a story that really stuck with me. As a matter of fact, my partner Roberto and I talked about it later, about how we found it particularly poignant. So you were telling the story about how you came to synthesis after being a guitarist. And I would rather you tell the story because you told it so well, as a way to sort of talk about your earlier experiences in music and introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, hi. Thanks, Dina. I'm so happy to be here and happy to be supporting the Alan R. Perlman ARP Foundation.
Particularly poignant.
Okay. I'm hearing the feedback from your computer now. Okay. So I started my musical life at age 7 when I was... that was 1959. I started as a guitar player because my mother, who was a fine musician, pianist, and probably was my biggest influence in music, she thought that guitars weren't really instruments. And so she let me play guitar because she didn't really want any of us to have a life as a professional musician. She wanted me to be a doctor, of course. But anyways, I started when I was 7, and I had very good teachers when I started. And by the time I was in my teens, I was playing professionally, and just kind of thought of myself as a guitar player. And then I went to Berkeley College of Music, and I got into composition. And actually, I took 2 synthesizer courses with Michael Rendish, who was a great teacher and who also became one of my mentors, and also with a guy named Jack Weaver. And actually, we learned on the ARP 2500 that Berkeley College of Music had at the time. Anyways, when I graduated from Berkeley, I started a band called Ictus, and wrote most of the music, and I was the guitar player in the band. And then in late 1976, I developed a problem with my hand, and as a result of a medical issue, I lost the use of my left hand, and I was told I would never play guitar again. And so, I had to try to figure out what I was going to do with my musical life, and I decided, well, synthesizers were monophonic in those days, and I could play the keyboard with my right hand, and I could move knobs and sliders with my left hand. So I sold all of my guitars, and I bought an ARP 2600 and a 16-step sequencer. And I began my second career as a synthesizer performer. Now, I say synthesizer performer because I never really thought of myself as a keyboard player. Even though I couldn't play guitar anymore, I didn't start to see myself as a keyboardist. I really thought of myself playing the synthesizer as kind of a live orchestrator for the music of my band. And we had a great keyboard player, always had great keyboard players in the band who played, Rhodes and electric piano and acoustic piano, and I did all the synth orchestrations. And so fortunately, some 10 years later, in 1986, thanks to advances in medicine, they were able to do a surgery and restore my hand so that I could once again play guitar. And I still was mostly into synthesizers and music technology at that time. And then in the early 90s, Opcode Systems introduced a piece of software called Studio Vision, which allowed you to record audio into a MIDI sequencer. And so I thought, well, I should start playing guitar again because I could record the audio of my guitar into my MIDI sequences. And so I did that, and I started getting back into playing guitar. But the guitar and the synthesizer still remained independent kind of entities. But then in 2000, I was an Apple master, and Apple sent me to Southeast Asia for 3 weeks to tour, playing shows. And I saw Q Sin Sun from from Singapore, was on here, and he actually saw me do my thing in Singapore. And for that tour, I needed to get from keyboard to guitar within a measure, and I couldn't figure out how to do that. So I went to see if I could buy a stand for my guitar so I could just walk up to the guitar and play it rather than having to put it on. And instead, I found a guitar that was a very strange-looking guitar. It was called a multi-act synth access guitar, and it was made by Godin. And I tried it. This was in Mars Music, and I tried it, and it worked. So I ended up buying one and a Roland guitar synthesizer, and took that on tour with me. And at the end of that tour, I wrote to the Godin Guitar Company, and I sent them the pictures that Apple had taken from all these concerts, and they asked if they could use it in their newsletter, and I said, of course. And then we met at NAMM, and Robert Godin and I became very close friends, and I started getting into connecting the guitar to the synthesizer. Long story. Turn your microphone on.
We got a new learning curve here, everybody. So we're going to hear some of this, right?
Yeah, I'm going to do something for you right now. If it's okay with you, I'll take it away.
Absolutely. Just want to mention if you could turn on comments.
Yeah. I can turn on comments?
You can turn on.
I believe they're on.
Okay. All right. So let's listen.
I'm seeing some.
You were seeing some. This is called Inner Spaces?
Well, first I'm going to demonstrate this guitar, and then I'm going to play a piece called Inner Spaces. So I think before I start to play, it would be helpful, I think, if everybody knows a little bit about the guitar, so that when I start to play and they can't understand what's going on, it might make more sense. So I'm going to switch camera positions here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you this guitar that I'm playing. I'm going to turn it up to the camera this way. So this is a guitar made by Godin. It's called the Montreal Premier Triple Play. It's made up in Montreal, Quebec, Canada by Godin Guitars. And it is a semi-hollow electric guitar with 2 humbucking pickups. And it also has in the bridge the Fishman triple play system. So the Fishman triple play system allows me to have a piezo pickup for the string pickup, and it also gives me wireless MIDI to the computer. So it has 3 voices, and I'm going to demonstrate each one. So first of all is the piezo pickup in the bridge, and this kind of gives me an acoustic sound. And the second voice are the magnetic pickups, and that gives me a nice electric guitar sound. And the third voice is the wireless MIDI. So for this, I'm sending the wireless MIDI to the laptop, and I'm using a software instrument from Spectrasonics called Omnisphere. And of course, I can mix all those together, so I get a nice big sound. One more thing I'm doing before I play is I'm also sending the audio from the guitar to my ARP2600. And since we're doing this for the ARP Foundation, I should point out that, so I'm taking the audio into the ARP2600 through the preamp. Then from the preamp, I'm patching into the voltage-controlled filter. And then I'm using this ring. This ring is by Genki Instruments in Iceland. And what this ring is doing is it's mapping my hand motion, or my finger motion in this case. It's capable of mapping in the horizontal and the vertical, tilting. You can also do certain gestures like tapping and vibrato with your finger. But I'm just going to be using the up and down motion for this particular instance. And basically, the ring is sending the information to a Eurorack module. I'm kind of pointing over that way, called the Wavefront, also by Genki. And then that's going into the filter so I can control the cutoff frequency, and it sounds like this. It's pretty cool, huh? Okay, so I'm going to play a... that's going into the filter so I can control the... I'm hearing the feedback again, Dina. So I'm going to play a short improvisation on a piece of mine called Inner Spaces. This was recorded by my Machine Music album on Chapters, and you can find Machine Music. Machine is a kind of play on my name, MASH, and then the fact that I play with machines, but it's Machine, M-A-S-H-I-N-E, music. And you can find it on Apple Music and Spotify, or wherever you get your digital music downloads and streams. Had to get that plug in, I'm sorry, Dina. But okay, I'm going to play a short improvisation. I'm going to move this glass of water out of the way. Inner Spaces.
Wow, that's quite a sound. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Hello.
Um, hello. Hello.
So I just wanted to say that the only thing that wasn't being played completely live there was the drum groove, which I was triggering with my feet. The bass part I was also playing with my feet, and then everything else came out of the guitar.
Were you able to get a view of your feet? I know you had talked about.
Yeah. Hang on. I'll.
Sure. Cool. Well, since I've asked you to show us some of your equipment already with the foot pedals, maybe we could talk some more about your studio. Would
Yeah.
you like to do a
Sure.
studio tour?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to get my phone and turn it into a camera. And that would be this one. Everything seems to be working today. So I'm, yes, sure. Don't. Okay, so I'm just going to walk over here. I'm going to try not to get too far from the microphone. There's the glass of water I just moved. Over here on my ARP 2600 road case that came from Korg, I have the Roger Linn Linstrument, and that's a really very, very powerful and expressive controller for making music. And what I really like about it is it's not a keyboard and it's not a guitar. It's a completely different thing, and so I like to play it every now and then, and use it when I'm needing to record expressive music. Next to it here is a Moog Sub 37, and this was a gift to me for my retirement party for Berkeley. Thank you very much. And this is a digitally controlled analog synthesizer. It has nice analog sound, but I like to use all the knobs that are on the front panel as controllers for my software synthesizers. So when I'm running Omnisphere from Spectrasonics, I can select Sub 37 as the controller hardware, and then the filter knob moves the filter on Omnisphere, the attack and decay, sustain, all the envelope controls do the same thing on the soft instrument, which is really cool. So my main speakers are JBLs, but right next to them is two Line 6 relay wireless guitar receivers, and those are getting the audio from my guitar, and then that's coming down into my audio interface, which is a Universal Audio Apollo. Below that, I have the Nectar Panorama P1, which for this last piece was giving me control over the mixer in Ableton Live. Below that, I have a Sensel Morph, which can send MIDI notes and controllers. And the really cool thing about this is that the face comes off, and you can replace it with other ones. And in fact, over there is one that I designed myself. It has a little XYZ trackpad and then a bunch of big knobs and some sliders. So that's kind of a cool thing. My main keyboard controller is a Native Instruments Complete Control S49 Mark II. And on it, I have a ribbon controller because I like to get expressive and in between the notes. This one was actually designed and built for me in 1987 by a good friend of mine, Jeff Tripp. You can see the Tripp Strip controller up there. So the information from the ribbon controller here, let's see if I can get around the microphone, comes out this little cable and up into the Tripp Strip computer, and then MIDI out and goes into the computer so I can control my software instruments. You think with all this hardware, I wouldn't need software, but actually I use the software more than the hardware, and we'll have a discussion about that, I'm sure. Right above the keyboard, I have the Roland SEO2. It's a little analog synthesizer whose controllers also can be mapped into Omnisphere or other software instruments, so that's a lot of fun to play. And then I have a Naturia BeatStep Pro sequencer, which wasn't in use in here, but what's cool about it is it can send control voltages and gates to the analog gear. It can also send USB MIDI to the software gear. The computer I'm using is just a MacBook Pro 16, and it's really powerful. It does mostly everything I need it to do. Right here, I have an iPad running this piece of software called Band Helper. And what Band Helper does is it gives me a list of tunes, like a playlist. And you can see I was playing Inner Spaces. And when I have that selected, it will send all the controllers to all my hardware and software so that everything is set up the way it needs to be for that song. And then it actually gives me a picture of what's going on with my feet. This is the Soul Man on the floor. And it tells me that the first button turns on and off the arpeggiator. The second one plays the drums, the first drums. The second is a fill. The third one is, so this is just kind of visual cues for an old guy like me to remember what's going on with my feet in case I forget. I'm going to set up for the next piece while we're talking so it'll be all ready. Here's the ARP 2600. Now this one is a prototype for the Korg full-size ARP 2600 release that was done in January 2020. I worked with the team at Korg Japan to help test and help make sure that this release was as close as possible to the original ARP 2600s. I had an ARP 1976 era ARP 2600 with the original ladder filter. That one was signed for me by Alan Perlman himself. And so I've donated my ARP 2600 and sequencer to the Ellen R. Perlman Foundation so they can have it for their archives. On top of the keyboard for the 2600 is the ARP branded Korg SP1 sequencer. And then I have a small Eurorack skiff. And here, this black module is the Genki wavefront that was taking the signals from the ring. In fact, if I turn it on, you can actually see the signals as I move around on it. And then it's taking control voltage into the filter. And then over here, I have a Mode Music Theramini. I'm not much of a thereminist, but I like the two antennas because I can use them as controllers in my music. If you'll give me another moment, I'm going to show you a diagram of how it's all set up for this last piece. If I can figure out how to share my screen.
You're going to do a share screen?
Yep. Oh, let's just see if I can do this real fast with my other hand. There we go. To put down the phone. So I just want to get the screen up here so I can see what you can see. Sorry for the dead air, everybody, but I'm doing a lot. So you can see here's my guitar. I have two line 6 relay transmitters. They're sending the audio wirelessly to the two G75 receivers, which are then going into the audio interface. And then that's going into the laptop. Simultaneously, the audio is coming out of one of the G75s, that's the one with the magnetic pickups, into the ARP 2600, through the preamp, into the filter, and then the Genki wave ring is sending information to the wavefront to control the filter. Also, the guitar is sending wireless MIDI to the triple play transceiver, which is plugged in by USB. And here's what I was using to play the bass, the Keith McMillan Instrument 12-step over USB into the computer. And here's how I was triggering the scenes in Ableton Live. This is the source audio Soul Man. And so that's basically what I was doing there. So I'm going to bring you back up here. Oh, I have to do this.
You know, one thing I want to add, I've been to your studio before, and it's really impressive how it's not as large a space as one would think with all this equipment. You've somehow streamlined it into this really beautiful, compact, yet it's easy to move around in. I was really impressed by the ergonomics of it.
Yeah, well, I have a small space and I have a lot of gear, and I have to cram it in there. But yeah, I did spend quite a bit of time designing, how it looks, and also, how it all fits together. And also, the cool thing about it. Let me just show this from the rear.
A lot of gear. Wow. Very cool. Um, so it's a good time to for us to chat a little bit, and then I want to open up the questions to our group here. There's a great group here. I see a lot of
Thanks,
familiar
Q.
faces and some great new faces. Um, so I'd like first of all just to ask what about your musical history? What were your, how did you get from your early start to where you are now?
Is my mic on? Some people were saying it was muted. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yeah.
Those
Can you hear
of
me?
you out in the audience, can somebody just say we can hear you again, just before we go on? I just want to make sure.
Michelle said she still can't hear you.
Test
You're still
one.
muted. Peter Bell says you're muted.
Well, that was before I turned the mic on. Oops. Oh, okay, you're back. They say it's better. Good. Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, so I started playing, as I said, guitar when I was young, and I studied with an amazing guitar teacher named Joe Fava. And Joe Fava had a huge guitar studio in Detroit. And when I started studying with him, he was teaching me classical guitar, and I confided in him that I was really more interested in playing rock and roll and modern music. And so he actually said, I know your mom, and I know she would probably not approve, but we have this other teacher named Jack Moncrief who just got off the road with James Brown, and he knows all about rock and roll and blues and R&B. So I started taking lessons with him once a week, and then also with Joe once a week. And then when I got to be around 11 or so, I started playing. Well, I should just say that when I was 11, it was 1963. And in 1963, the Beatles came to the U.S. and took by storm. And all of a sudden, guitars started to be in the forefront. So I started, getting calls to play wedding gigs. Joe would recommend me because I had an electric guitar and amplifier by that time. And I also got a chance to, through Joe, to study with lots of great classical guitar guitarists, maestros. But when I went to in high school, I was playing in rock bands. But when I went to college, I majored in pre-med because, as I said before, my mom wanted me to be a doctor, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor until about third year in, just after I had made my applications to med school, I discovered that I couldn't stand the sight of blood, and I was bring you back in on the screen there, Dina. I'm sorry. I was, I would faint at the sight of blood, and if people started talking about how they were feeling, if I would start to feel queasy. So I decided I couldn't be a doctor, so I dropped out of pre-med, and I went back to Wayne State University in Detroit, where I grew up, and enrolled in the music department, which I then tested out of because, I'd been going to, classical guitar master classes, and I'd studied with some, great jazz players. And so, and who was my guitar teacher at Wayne State again was Joe Fava, the same guy I studied with since I was 7. So a good friend of mine, Steve Shepard, had gone to Berkeley a year before then, and he told me that I should come to Boston and check out Berkeley. And so I did. And then January of 1973, I enrolled in Berkeley. And I quickly tested out of the guitar department. And in my second year, they asked me if I would teach guitar. So I started teaching guitar at Berkeley. And then after I graduated, they hired me on as a full-time teacher to teach core music. And I was really getting into composition. And as I mentioned, I started this group called Ictus and started writing lots and lots of music and playing. And then Just before I lost the use of my hand, the band signed a touring contract with Mort Lewis in New York City, and then I lost the use of my hand, and I started getting the synthesizer. And actually, 3 weeks after I got my very first ARP 2600, my band Ictus went out on the road opening for Dave Brubeck, who was managed by Mort Lewis. And so the very first night we were playing at Brandeis University in Massachusetts, and in the beautiful hall. And I drove up in my little Chevette, and my ARP 2600 was so new, I still had it in its original cardboard box. And I pulled into a parking space, and there was Dave Brubeck's huge semi, and the road crew was bringing in all the equipment. And as I took the ARP 2600 in its original cardboard box out of the hatchback of my little Chevette, one of the roadies looked down at me from the truck and said, "Hey man, nice road case." Made me feel about that big. And then I get on stage, and Dave was playing with his sons at the time, Darius and Chris and Danny. And so we got on stage, we all set up simultaneously. And then we wanted to start to do a sound check. And so they just said, "Hey, let's play take 5." And so we're all playing. And meanwhile, of course, Dave doesn't come out during the sound checks or anything. So then the way that the concert was set up was my group, Ictus, played a set. And then we left the stage. Dave came up. He played a set. Then they cleared the audience. And then we all went downstairs to the green room and had dinner. And then they brought a new audience in. We came up and did a set. And they came up and did a set. Well, so when we're going down to the green room, Dave said to me, "There was a piece that you played in that set. It was called Something for Susan. And it's really a beautiful song." And I said, "Oh, well, thank you." And he said, "I think if we got a lyricist, we could have a hit song with that." And I said to him, "But Dave," now this is Dave Brubeck, right? This is Dave Brubeck with Time Further Out and all the weird time signature stuff that he did. He said, I said to him, "Dave, that's in a lot of weird time signatures." He said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yeah, it starts in 1716, and then it goes to 11/8/9/8, 11/8, 21/16, back to 1716. I said, "Then there's one bar of 4, and it goes into 74/64, then back to 1716. And he looked at me and he said, "Sounded more like a waltz in 3 to me." And I'm thinking, okay, well, this is cool. And then he said, "Do you guys have a record deal?" And I said, "No." He goes, "You guys sound great, and I love the music that you're writing. Maybe we could produce a record for you." And so at that time, he and Darius were working in the world of direct-to-disc recording, and there was a recording studio in Nashville called Direct-to-Disc Labs. And so he said, let's do a record. And so we started rehearsing at Darius's home in Connecticut. And then sometimes we would rehearse at Dave Brubeck's home. And Dave would give us criticism and help us with it. And then we played lots of gigs with them. And then just before the record was supposed to get recorded, Direct-to-Disc Labs went bankrupt because digital recording had come out. And everybody was moving to digital recording for audio files instead of direct-to-disc. So we kind of regrouped, and we ended up making that record, but just on plain old, 24 track and vinyl. It was a record called Future Winds, and on the Airborne label. And actually, if you go to my website at machine.com or at davidmash.com, you can read all about Ictus and the history. And then after that, I stopped touring. I got married to my lovely wife, Erica, in 1982. And I started started playing in the theater, playing synthesizer. And I joined the group at the Shakespeare Theater in Boston, Boston Shakespeare Company, and they of course didn't do Shakespeare. They did very avant-garde productions, and they did a production of Mother Courage, and I was built into the stage, and this was. I'm thinking.
Up by the Charles River. Did they do that outside?
No, this
the
was
Charles-
down. This was in downtown Boston in an old theater. But anyways, I was built into the stage with my synthesizers underneath, and the provost of Berkeley came to that performance, and afterwards he stopped me and said, Dave, didn't you play guitar? And I said, yeah, but I've been doing synthesizers, for about 5 years now. And he said, you should be doing this at Berkeley. You should be teaching this stuff. And I said, oh, really? So he said, let's talk. And we did. And eventually I started what was then called the Music Synthesis Department. It became known as Electronic Production and Design. And I got more and more into synthesizers and teaching synthesizers, and then thinking about how technology could not only be used to help teach synthesizers, but also to help learn music and teach music. And so I got much more involved in computer-aided instruction and then online teaching. And eventually Berkeley made me assistant dean of curriculum for academic technology. And I was given the reins to go and work with all the different departments at the school and see how music technology could be integrated into their teaching. And eventually we started thinking about building an online school, and then I became vice president of technology, then senior vice president for innovation strategy and creativity. That's my career. And then I retired, and now I'm making music again.
It's come full circle.
Yeah.
Come full circle. Yeah. So a question about your time at Berkeley, which I thought would be kind of fun, since Michelle Moog is here too. You did, was it in the late 80s that you had my father, Michelle's father, Tommy Coster, who else was there? There was you had tell us about that. That was an interesting event.
So as I was leaving the synth department and getting ready to become assistant dean, I thought we should do something to a really public event to help kind of cement Berkeley's role in electronic music education. And so we had a symposium. That year, I had, it's actually funny, the year before then, I was at the NAMM show. And if anybody's been at the NAMM show, at the end of the evening, they flash the lights and they say, okay, the show's over, go home. So I'm walking out with everybody who's walking out of NAMM. And I hear these people talking behind me, and the guy said, yeah, I always wanted to go to Berkeley, and, my son is going to start there in the fall. I'm so excited for him because I always wanted to do that. So I turned around and said, I'm sorry, I couldn't help overhear your conversation. And hi, my name is David Mash. I work at Berkeley College of Music, and I just heard that you were talking about it. And he said, well, hi, I'm Tom Coster. And I said, Tom Coster, the keyboard player, synthesist? And he said, yeah. I said, I play your recordings for my students all the time when we're talking about synthesizer performance. And he said, really? And I said, yeah. He said, well, my son is going to start there in the fall. I said, well, I'd be glad to look out for him, but, would you be interested in coming and being a guest lecturer? He said, yeah, I would love that. So we actually brought him to Berkeley for a whole year to be artist in residence. And so while he was there, and I was getting ready to leave the electronic music part of Berkeley, music synthesis, I invited Bob Moog and your father and Ray Kurzweil and Tom Coster to do a panel discussion on kind of the development of synthesizers into real-time performance, from the studio into the real-time performance world. And surprisingly, they all agreed, and they came out, and we had a huge audience in the Berkeley Performance Center. And it was just a great experience, I think, for everybody. For me, for the people who were on the panel, and I think for the audience.
Cool. Interesting. Um, so I had some questions. I've been dying to ask you this for a long time, and I decided to wait until now. Can you tell us what a futurist is? This is part of his website title, if you want to.
So, I never had any training in being a college administrator. I I often would go to workshops and things, and at one of the workshops, I heard a quote by somebody that said, "The best way to predict the future is to build it." And so I started thinking about that, and that's really what a futurist is somebody who sees something that's not there, and instead of just dreaming about it, actually sets out to make it happen. So a good example of this is when I was assistant dean of curriculum at Berkeley, I started to find that I had hit the wall with my two bosses, Gary Burton, who was the provost at the time, and Lee Burke, who was president at the time. And they were both visionary guys. But I was thinking really big. And this was 1994. The World Wide Web had just launched. And I was talking about how we had to get the college on the web, and we had to start thinking about teaching on the web and how we could support learning from the web. And they were like looking at me like I was an alien. So I wrote a short story. And the short story featured one of Berkeley's teachers, Pat Pattison, who teaches songwriting. And I talked about a day in his life and a day in the life of his students, and how he communicated with them online, and how they posted their work for the rest of the class to see, so I wrote this short story. And before I turned it in, I gave it to Pat Pattison. I said, "Pat, I'm using your name here. I think you should read this and tell me if it's okay. I don't want to, for you to find out about it later." And Pat read it and said, "Yeah, why not?" And so I gave it to Gary Burton, who immediately gave it to Lee Burke. Lee Burke called me in and said, I think this is the foundation of our first college strategic plan. I think we should do this. And what we need is a plan now to do this." And so then I started thinking about how we would do it. And the first step was to wire the whole campus. Now, this was 1994. We first wired it with copper, and then later on with fiber, and then later on wireless. But I was the person who helped the college connect to the internet and start doing web stuff. And then we had to modernize the library and build a library catalog system, because it was card catalog before then. So we built a huge database so that all the music that was in the library could be accessed through the card catalog. And we built a really kind of cool database for that. And then one thing left to the next, and eventually I started teaching the teachers how to use technology in their teaching, and eventually we got to and about 10 years later, about 2004, we were getting ready to bring in a new president, and I ran into Pat Pattison on the street, and he said to me, "Everything that you wrote in that short story came true. It's like you predicted the future." And I said, "No, we had an idea about what the future could be, and then we built it. We took it step by step, and we made it happen." And that's what futurism is about. And so, today, a good friend of mine, Steve Shepard, actually, the guy who brought me to Berkeley, Steve wrote, "Since you're a futurist, can you tell us how long this is going to go on, speaking about politics?" And I said, "My sources tell me that the stink will last for a while, but as a futurist, we can change the future. We can make it happen. And our role is to actually get out and do something, and that is to go vote." And so I think that's the message from this futurist today is very soon, go vote.
Great.
I'm sorry for the politics. Do we want to take questions from from the audience?
I had a question a while back from Steve McQuarrie had asked, what is the keyboard pedal board? This was quite a while back, though.
Okay, so that's the Keith McMillan Instruments 12-step. That's the foot pedal on the floor.
Okay, I hope Steve is still here, but I'll be we can check it. All right, so we'd like to get some questions from the audience. There must be a lot of questions. There's a lot of interesting material covered. Well, you can play another piece while they meditate.
I see an old friend of mine, Arnie Braver, said, "Did it start with the other hand?" That was part of it. That was a rock band that he and I played in when we were about 14, maybe.
What was the name of the rock band? The Other Hand?
The Other Hand, yeah. Like, on the other hand.
Oh, okay. All right. So, questions.
Anybody want a question out there? Hey, Steve. Hi, Phil. I see Phil Wilson, who was one of my best teachers at Berkeley, and also somebody who influenced me in more ways than he knows.
Well, I have more questions, okay. So we can always go back to me.
And I do want to play another piece if we can before we get out.
Absolutely, yeah. So just, I guess, one more question, and then we could get to some music. Okay, here we go. Neek wants to know, did you beta test the ARP Avatar?
No, actually, when the Avatar was being developed, I didn't play guitar, and actually I turned my back on everything to do with the guitar because it was very painful for me. So there was a lot of activity in Boston. Randy Roos was very involved with testing the Avatar, but I kind of stayed away. Now, of course, that I can play again, I'd love to be able to do that.
I think let's hear another piece. Okay,
so I'll play one more piece. This is from the Beatles' Rubber Soul album. I figured, I played my music at first. Now I should actually do something that everybody would recognize, except I've arranged it in a way that you won't recognize it, of course. Give me 1 second. Okay, so I have to do my little trick with turning the microphone on and off because of my guitar. So for this piece of music, I'm going to start by using the MIDI to play a contact sample library of a 12-string, which sounds like this. And then I'm going to add the acoustic sound from the piezo pickup. And then the electric guitar again. So what I have is kind of a supernatural guitar that's the combination of these three voices and using all the technology, both in signal processing the guitar as well as using the MIDI. And then when it comes time for the solo, I'll play a synth sound. So I'm going to use some backing tracks for this. These are tracks that I played previously, unlike the first one, which was all live. This is a piece by the Beatles from the Rubber Soul album, John Lennon-McCartney, Norwegian Wood. I guess I didn't turn the microphone off, so hopefully there wasn't too much pickup from the microphone.
We see there's a delay when I'm trying to listen to you on the other computer, so I didn't want to miss that. So hi everybody. This was great. We're actually just about out of time. So I would love. There's one more question, and then we can get back to you if we can't get to you. But we'd really love to hear. Anybody? It sounded great, by the way. Yeah.
Nobody has any questions?
You explained your setup really well. I think that's
okay.
Okay. All right.
Oh, so there is a question from Bora Ulsosloy. Let me see if I can I make that go onto the screen? Actually, he says, David, you were a great communicator. Thank you. I suppose this was part of your success in your career. Any suggestions on that? How did you do it? How do you manage to be... Oh, come on. He asked me, there's a lot of stress out there. Yoga? Yes, I meditate a lot. My wife does yoga every day. I do yoga in my mind. I don't know how I came to be a communicator other than the fact that I spent years teaching, and I guess that helps you to do that.
All right.
Mark Schlenzig said, using that much electronics, I'm wondering how flexible you are for improvisations. So are the song patterns rigid, or can you change them? I can change them. They're actually in Ableton Live, and they're in small clips, and I can trigger them with my feet. So I did that in the opening improvisation a little bit with the drum cues. But yes, that particular one had a kind of a set form, but a lot of times I'll do it with open sections, and I can also change the guitar sounds with my feet, so I have a lot of control, and that's mostly from using the Source Audio Soulman foot switch controller. All right, well, I just want to thank everybody for coming, and it was great to be here. Dina, thanks for inviting me. And
my pleasure.
I'll just put a plug in here. The Alan R. Perlman Foundation is a not-for-profit 501c3. And so please, if you're thinking about how much you're enjoying the series that Dina has been doing, please support the foundation. You can go to the foundation webpage and make a donation anytime.
I just put the URL in right now for the donate page.
Great. Well,
yeah.
Thanks, everybody. So with that, I think, shall I play the outro and we'll say,
yeah, I think
okay.
So.
Bye-bye, everybody.
It was great to see you all online, and till next time.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.